presented by Centris Federal Credit Union. That's DB. I'm Ravi Lulla. We're joined now by Cynthia Frelund from the NFL Network. Cynthia, how are you this morning?
I'm great, thank you. How are you?
Good morning. We are not going to start with quarterbacks. Are you happy? I'm curious. I do have an interesting question because I think we get along. We were hypothetically talking yesterday and the day before, obviously with Deion talking to Dallas, and I didn't really take that move seriously. But we talked about pros and cons and like taking pressure off of Jerry and would he be willing to not be the story and all these other scenarios. And it led me to believe, I landed the plane this way with your colleagues, with how Deion is perceived, former players that cover the sport. Do you think that because you almost never see this in the NFL. I mean, everybody's fair game, but it seems like we kind of tap dance around Coach Sanders' prowess and his presence, almost like we're afraid to make him mad, right? Like, could you see that being a thing if he was a head coach in the NFL where he would be above criticism?
You know what? I actually don't think so. I mean, I worked with Deion for years, so I know him, on a personal level. And, my sense is that in many ways, I kind of think this is sort of like unintentionally innovative, because the thing about Deion, he has a presence around him and people want to have fun around. He's like Dan Campbell, but he's just a different version. Do you know what I mean? And the thing I think that's really innovative here is like, he surrounds himself with great people. So maybe he's got like, this like, I don't know, bigger than big personality or presence, but that's what he did at Colorado, or that's what he's doing at Colorado. And I think what he'd do here is it could be a way to kind of create this dynamic where you have the offensive coordinators responsible for the offense, the defensive, like maybe you actually have like a true like head coach as opposed to, an offensive play caller that masquerades as a head coach, or a defensive coach that is now responsible for the offense. I don't know. It's an interesting experiment if it works out.
Right. Because could I see like, I just don't see guys being willing to openly criticize when, I mean, even I'm a fan of the Steelers, like Tomlin right now just getting vilified, right? Or McCarthy or any of these guys. Like, would he be with his peers, would colleagues go in like they do on almost any other NFL coach?
They would. It would take a minute, but they would. I mean, I think at first it would be, like it's not like he's had a perfect run at Colorado. I think that a lot of people in the NFL world have a lot of reverence for how hard it is to be a college coach with NIL and transfer portals and this, that, and the other. So, I mean, I don't know. I think maybe for about, I don't know, a week he'd get that luxury. And then it would still be the same. And I actually think some people would use it as a way to, the Cowboys are always interesting in our league, right? Like they just, even if they're not good, they're always interesting. So I think some people would use that as a point to kind of draw in more attention to themselves. That it could be, it could go a lot of different ways.
Yeah. Cynthia, you brought up kind of an interesting distinction there while we were talking about head coaches and the guys that get hired that are sort of true head cultures. I sort of lump them in the head coaches. I kind of lump them in the culture builders. And then you've got the specialists on one side of the ball or the other. Have you gotten a sense, I know you run numbers on a lot of things, but like, have you gotten a sense of which version is more successful, or is it kind of a crapshoot, right? Because I look like a Dan Campbell, obviously hugely successful in Detroit. You'll get like a Jim Harbaugh, who you've just kind of figure, hey, he comes in, he's going to win 10 or 11 games every year. Mike Vrabel basically gets hired for that as well. But then you have like kind of the Sean McVays of the world that are highly successful, and they sort of had that offensive guru tag as well. I'm just curious if you've gotten a sense on which way seems to be more successful on those hires.
There's not one formula. The fact of the matter is, it's the sum of the parts of all of the coordinators and position coaches, et cetera. And it also really helps if you have a good quarterback. But some of the things we don't see, or we do, some of the things that make it harder are, it's not like you're seeing turnover at places where, Patrick Mahomes resides, or Tom Brady, or, even Joe Burrow. I know Lou Anarumo isn't there anymore, but that's a defensive coordinator. But when you have great quarterback play, it kind of nullifies a lot of things, and that can make it harder to distinguish the impact of the coach specifically, and the coach, at least as they relate to not being a part of their coordinators as well.
So you're the perfect one to ask this question. One of the great arguments we argue every day, Cynthia, just for the record. When did we miss the blasting out via social media accounts when organizations interview coaches? Is something or nothing that it seems to be this thing to go out of their way to let us know who's interviewing?
I think they just want to.
Is that new?
I don't think it's super new. I think the thing that's different is, with people reporting and insiders and all of these things happening, I think that they want to be like their own source, right? All these people saying this person's interviewing here. They just want to they want to be their own. This is the truth, right?
Yeah.
So Cynthia, as you look through some of the head coaching candidates that are up for these jobs, we see Mike Vrabel. We've talked about the Bears before, I know. Is there a candidate that you've seen out there? Because it seems like they've interviewed everybody short of me and DB for that job. Is there a candidate you look at, and you look at the roster, and you look at kind of the ownership GM position, you go, okay, this guy can make it work in Chicago when we've got about 40 years of history without.
And she's got polls insight.
Well, first of all, it doesn't matter how many they've interviewed. The Jets still have them. So the Jets have interviewed even more people. So it's not like, that's interesting. But I don't think there's one solution. I think there's a lot of, I would be very interested to know who the structure, you have to support Caleb Williams in that job. And I would love to know, and of course, at this point in the game, we don't know who each of these head coaches or potential head coaching candidates could bring along to specifically support that quarterback position. And I want to know what their plans are, and the GM is involved here too, to get a new O-line, to figure out how to protect any quarterback that should be in Chicago ever, because, those are two places you'd really need to start and address. I think that the defense is a little bit better than people might think. There's some great pieces on that defense, but you have to support Caleb, and you have to figure out that O-line. But it's really about not just the head coach, but the whole structure of who comes along with them.
Cynthia, at first blush, would you rather have the job in Las Vegas or the job in New Orleans?
Yeah. I would rather have Las Vegas because, well, number one, being able to have a little bit of cap space, very much helps. And the Saints, despite being able to do some good juggling, their cap situation is very, very, very prohibitive.
The ownership situation in Las Vegas, how big of a concern would that be for you?
And do you mean Tom Brady or do you mean Mark Davis?
Both.
Mark Davis is one of the nicest people I've ever spoken to. Mm-hmm. So it's strange. He's a very nice human being. I think the hard part is in the AFC West, you're always compared to Patrick Mahomes, and now you have three teams in that division that made the playoffs this past year. So it's a really difficult division. I hope Tom Brady can come in and help, and I hope that they figure out who the quarterback of the future is there. If they get that right, I think things would be a lot better. I love Max Crosby. He's actually going to be on our show this weekend. He's such a wonderful leader. It's great. I know Antonio Pierce well from 2008 or whatever. So it was a hard job and it's not fun. But you know, I don't know. If you're a head coach, at least you still get paid later. Like I feel bad for the position coaches. It's going to be harder to convince people who aren't getting paid, you know, $5 or $6 million a year to come there, as opposed to head coach. I guess you buy the ticket, you get on the ride, right? But like, it's the other people that's going to be harder.
Given the pieces on the rosters, better, same, or different, the coaching job that Sean Payton and the other Sean McVay did respective to their teams?
Very different. I mean, one of the, like, you know, Sean McVay had to deal with so much injury this past season. I think, you know, if you look at the number of plays that Matthew Stafford, Kyren Williams, Puka Nacua, and Cooper Kupp were all on the field at the same time for, like, if you look since the beginning of 2023, it's something like 700 of 2,200 potential play, like something crazy, like a third of the time. That's very hard to deal with. And then, you know, if you're thinking about like, okay, well, with Denver, you have to navigate a cap situation with Russell Wilson playing in Pittsburgh. And if you find your quarterback, which you did, and they drafted really well, it seems like, you know, that defense is epic. And even though they had an early exit, it's a big deal to have a defense that good. So I don't know. I think both of them did wonderful jobs, really great coaches, but to be able to find a quarterback in Bo Nix that everyone else was like, I don't know, like I'm not sure how I feel about him, and, you know, make him be truly someone at least in the running to talk about as offensive rookie of the year is a big deal.
Cynthia, let's stay on Sean McVay there for a minute as well. What are the chances you give them against the Eagles this weekend? I think a lot of people are really interested in how the Rams have been playing, not as in love with what Philadelphia has been doing. I think if Philadelphia is right at 6-point favorite there, like, what kind of chances do you give the Rams?
I mean, they always have chances, but I think that the Eagles win this one pretty easily. I mean, I'm not looking at that 37-20 win before and saying, okay, I just slide it in again. Week 12, it's a different ball game now. But I will say, if you look at the O-line for the Eagles, it's very good. And that's going to be where the biggest source of a difference from last week to this week is. I don't think that the Eagles are going to let Jalen Hurts and or Saquon Barkley, because that is part of this equation, be pressured 60% of the time. That's not going to happen. And conversely, on the other side, that defensive front, I mean, Jalen Carter, Zach Bond, like, what's going on with them this season is very, very strong, especially on the defensive side. And it's going to be very hard to have some solutions to all of the things that defense is going to be able to solve for. Like, I don't know how, you know, you get, like, Puka Nacua is great. We absolutely know that. But I don't think Kyren Williams will have the type of success that will help out enough to give them the edge. And if you look at Matthew Stafford's stats, this is his worst year since 2018 under pressure. And I think pressure is something that the Eagles will be able to exact on them.
Cynthia, if you look at assets, maybe stability, the front office, what was your level of surprise that the Giants were so early coming out talking about retaining Dable, and what you think that means for them going forward as a team that can turn it around?
I mean, I think part of it is, you know, they almost, like, you have to weigh in, like, it with what the, and I say cost, and I don't mean it like money, but I think like cost to your organization of switching again are. It's been a lot of switches recently, and they're one of the, you know, historic organizations. Look at, like, you know, the Steelers, the Ravens, like, many of them don't switch their kind of GM and, you know, and coach or even position coaches all that often relative to some of the other ones, right? So I think that part of it is they believe that, you know, with a fresh start, with a fresh set, like, you know, let's keep the same organization in place, let's keep our scouts in place, let's keep our, like, all of the people whose names we don't necessarily know in place to see if we can have a better outcome. it feels like they're trying to give some continuity. That move is an effort to make more continuity in thought and philosophy as opposed to starting over again. They made a big acquisition last offseason, and their defensive front was very good. I mean, Brian Burns was a nice addition. So they're starting from a place of, okay, let's start from our defensive front and build out from there. That's what it looks like, at least. And, I also think that it also signals to me that they really want to get quarterback right, because if you're changing your strategy right now and you don't have, you don't have the strongest quarterback class, I think that they're saying, hey, we need to get we all need to be rowing in the same direction to pick the right quarterback going forward. And that's just kind of what it's going to be.
Cynthia, who is more fitting into that sort of cliche we use that isn't usually true of being a quarterback away, the Giants or the Jets?
I have no idea what's going on with the Jets from the standpoint of just the sheer number of people they're interviewing is like it blows my, who has time for that? Like, that's an incredible amount of time. I would imagine my answer to that is that I think that the team with a better roster is the Jets. When they're healthy, they've got a great defense. They've got a lot of pieces, that are a big deal. They brought in Devontae Adams. I mean, I'm assuming he's still there, like in this equation, right? So I think that the Jets with the right quarterback and with perhaps a little bit of help on the O-line, because even though, Aaron Rodgers didn't get sacked a ton, it still is not an O-line that's dynamic and can open up the run game, which is something that now more and more quarterbacks are so mobile. We need O-lines to be able to do some more interesting stuff. So I would say that I think that the Jets are, but if I'm the Giants, I'm taking a bigger crack at it because it feels like you're playing with house money. Like, it's not like everyone's sitting here being like, wow, like, no one would be surprised if Brian Daboll got fired in a year or not, right? But if they pick the right quarterback, now you've got tons of upside.
Cynthia, this may sound silly because I think Mahomes is the best quarterback in the league. But when it comes, you talk to defensive coordinators and guys game planning, what do you think keeps defensive coordinators up the most at night? Mahomes, Lamar, or Josh?
Ooh, that's a great question. I think this season, it's probably right now. The answer is whichever one you face the least. But because you
right,
they're also such a big deal. But I would imagine that this season specifically, or in this part of the season, it's Lamar, just with how dynamic that offensive, like you look at the Ravens offensive line, they got 3 new offensive linemen to start the beginning of the season. And the beginning of the season looked different. They weren't running all the different types of plays that we're used to. And then that has actually kind of been a strategic move. They weren't quote unquote good at the beginning of the season. Well, what happened was they started to kind of build that chemistry, all worked together. And the reason that the Ravens feel so scary right now is because they keep adding plays to their playbook because they kind of got this, like, I'm going to call it like an artificial bump, but like this added, like a, when you boost a rocket into space, that little extra, that second one that gets it, the second ignition that happens, like, because once their O-line is playing together, and now you got Derrick Henry there, that just makes it so once that chemistry is formed, well, now we can add even more wrinkles and folds. So that's probably the one I would say. But my one caveat is that without Zay Flowers, if he's for some reason not playing, it makes things a little bit easier for Bobby Babich this weekend, or whatever, any defensive coordinator.
Cynthia, when you look at that matchup with the Ravens and the Bills, you've got a couple of quarterbacks who haven't been able to break through in the AFC, largely because of the guy that plays in Kansas City. But, there's some other narratives that float around. Which of those two quarterbacks need to advance the most in order to kind of help alleviate some of that narrative around their playoff success or lack thereof?
Well, I think both I could make a really strong argument for both of them. The one this year that I think it feels like for whatever reason it would be a bigger, like if I think about, like, okay, I put myself in Monday morning and I'm like, wow, like that's a real bummer for both of them, obviously, but it feels like with Josh Allen this year and like the narrative ahead of the season that the Bills weren't even going to win the division, because Aaron Rodgers' division now, and losing Stephon Diggs, and there are a lot of pieces on the defense that have changed. And it feels like Josh Allen had to very much put a lot of it on his shoulders. And the fact that he's not turned the ball over and he's kind of addressed some of the questions that were fair criticisms of him before, I think it would feel, it's like, oh man, like, Josh really could have done it this year. I think that would be kind of the feeling after. Whereas like Lamar's like, oh, he can do it next year.
Noise and good team and all. If the NFC favorites win, would you make the case that it is less advantageous for Detroit to host Philly and let Philadelphia play inside than it would be for Philly to have Detroit play outside had it gone the other way?
Nope. The Lions, I'm going to tell you something, that it is loud AF in that same Ford Field. And
I forgot. Hey, are you rocking the Lions sweatshirt this morning by chance? Because I forgot who I was asking that question to.
I have blue fingernails, but I'm fingernails are painted blue. But other than that, no. But I actually do think that, number one, it is that loudness. It's not a joke. Like those fans turn up and turn out. It's gonna be very hard for Jalen Hurts to hear. Should it be that matchup?
Yeah.
As a Lions fan, just what's your confidence level going in this weekend? How you feeling?
As a Lions fan or as an analyst for the NFL? Because those are two different things.
Both. Let's do both.
As an analyst, my math is very strong that the Lions have a good chance of advancing based on their offense, their offensive line specifically, and the fact that it feels like their offense can overcome some of the woes from this really banged up defense. As a fan, I was not happy until I saw 3 zeros after 31-9. So it's just the way it is. Like, I've been used to being disappointed my whole life, so going to be hard to not be fearful until the game's over.
If you're Ben Johnson, how careful should you or would you be that you don't always get arguably the best offensive line in the NFL to call plays for?
If I'm Ben Johnson, like truly, and I'm not saying this as a Lions fan, if I'm Ben Johnson, I am, depending on who he's paired with from the standpoint of like who these great defensive minds that are available are, I'm really careful about leaving. I would try to extort the Lions for a lot more money. I would just be like, pay me like a head coach, and I'll stay here, because this is not a strong quarterback or offensive line class. So if you're inheriting a mess, it could be difficult. It could be very difficult.
That's Cynthia Frelund from the NFL Network. Cynthia, great stuff as always. We really appreciate it, and I hope the fan side of you has a nice, enjoyable weekend. I'm sure the analyst side of you will, no matter what. We appreciate it as always.
Thank you so much for having me, and enjoy the football.
Thanks, Cynthia.